Good afternoon, everyone. Or good morning, I guess it still is. We'll go through the noon hour while we're here. Welcome to our third meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Judiciary. And as I always tell people at the beginning of the meeting, please put your phones on silent if you can. Part of the issue is it interferes with the microphones and the equipment. And that's why we ask you to do that. We do have a full agenda today. We actually modified the agenda and moved one matter to November because this is going to be a full agenda. We have two matters on today, and I'm going to address those, and then I'm going to do an introduction and we'll get started. So first of all, today we're going to have organized retail theft, and I'm going to ask Shannon Stiglitz with her guest to go ahead and make themselves present at the table. And then after that, immediately following, we're going to have security and civil unrest. And I want to point out today that we have a special guest today, Chief Martin Brock from the North Carolina General Assembly Police Department. Martin, thank you for being here. And he's going to talk to you about some things that we've discussed over the last couple of years. I got to know him through an offshoot of NCSL through NLSSA. We'll talk about that today. And we're actually heading to the conference next week, so we'll talk to you a little bit about that. With that, I do have a guest that I want to introduce, and then I'll ask the members if they have any guests to introduce, and then we'll call the roll. So with me today, I have Bella Brooks, who's in the front row here. Bella is a student at Lexington Catholic. For those of you that golf in this room, she's one of the top golfers in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and she is in the process of starting her application process to get some scholarships around the country. And she's also a great student, and she's going to be shadowing me today in an intern type page role. And so welcome Bella, and her parents are here with her, David Brooks, who's on the front row, and his wife, I think okay, I didn't know if Jenny was here or not. So that's my guest. Does anybody else have any guests they want to recognize? Okay, seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Berg, Senator Carroll,
Here.
Senator Kerr, Senator Neal, Senator Schickel,
Here.
Senator Schroeder, President Stivers, Senator Turner,
Here.
Senator West,
Here.
Senator Wheeler,
Here.
Representative Banta,
Here.
Representative Blanton,
Here.
Representative Bratcher,
Here.
Representative Cantrell, Representative Decker,
Present.
Representative Elliott,
Here.
Representative Fisher,
Here.
Representative Flannery,
Here.
Representative Hevren,
Present.
Representative Cole-Carney,
Present.
Representative Lewis,
Here.
Representative Maddox, Representative McCoy, Representative Minter,
Here.
Representative Mosier, Representative Nemes,
Here.
Representative Petrie,
Here.
Representative Scott, Representative Stevenson, Co-Chair Westerfield, Co-Chair Massey.
Here. Thank you. I do want to recognize one of our baby members, our newest member born into this committee. And with us today, we have Representative Patrick Flannery, who has now been named to this committee. He says he's going to cause trouble today, so I would ask all of you all to keep him under control, especially over there to my left. So I'll sick Representative Hevren on you if you cause any problems there, Representative Flannery. Okay, I know you did. All right, so we're going to start today with something we've talked about for the last couple of years. First of all, though, I'm going to approve the minutes. So do we have a motion? We have a second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? None. So we have approval of the minutes. We're going to move right on into organized retail theft. And this actually came up 2 years ago when we were talking about the felony threshold bill. So one of the concerns that was raised during that time, and some of the people in this room were very involved in that bill, was the concern that if we raise the threshold, that might cause more people to go out and commit crimes, especially shoplifting, those kinds of things that would violate our standards and violate our laws, but there would not be enough penalty to go with it. Now, we discussed all that through the felony threshold bill, but we also discussed organized retail theft because what was new to me, even though I work in the criminal justice system, is that there are groups that are actually paying people to go out and commit these offenses to bring them back the items so they can sell them on eBay or social media or some other routes. So we're talking today about what we might be able to do about organized retail theft. And I know we have RICO laws, but at the same time, we might need to look at this for purposes of future legislation. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Shannon Stiglitz, who's the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for the Kentucky Retail Federation. Shannon, and you may recognize your guest.
Thank you very much, Chairman Massey and committee members, for the opportunity to speak with you today. I will introduce my guest. With me is Nicole Toiloy from Walgreens Asset Protection, and Matt Rosteet. He is the Director of Organized Retail Crime with Kroger. So we are grateful for the opportunity today to talk about this issue, and I think you will find it interesting that we're not talking about your shoplifter who may be feeding a habit necessarily, or one-time offenders. We are really talking about criminal rings, and so we'll go into that in a little bit detail. Just to give you a little bit about what retail's impact on Kentucky is, I always like to provide this slide to you. We are the largest employer of Kentuckians, and not just that, we do see ourselves as community members. Our retailers have deep ties with their communities, whether they're small or large, and they whether that's because of their employees or their customers. And so we are proud to be operating in Kentucky and proud of what we provide to the Commonwealth. I always like to point to the fact that we collect a large number of sales taxes, and you'll see that in a minute, about $2 billion for the Commonwealth. So what is it when we're talking about organized retail crime or organized retail theft? Just to give you a definition from the FBI, what it is ORT by retail loss professionals can generally be described as professional burglars, boosters, cons, thieves, fences, and resellers conspiring to steal and sell retail merchandise obtained from retail establishments by theft or deception. These are a few of examples. You may have all seen the videos commonly referred to as smash and grabs, and we'll get into the severity of these events a little bit, and that will come up again. But here's a few examples. 5 charged in Bellevue, Washington, with theft over $100,000. The Homeland Security identifies a $70 billion loss annually because of organized retail theft. And then in Michigan, a 70-year-old woman was hiring heroin addicts, and she was found arrested for organizing one of these theft rings. So why do we look at this that's on the rise? One is what's identified by federal law enforcement as well as researchers is first, the ease and anonymity of selling products online. If you go to a pawn shop in Kentucky, you have to provide your government ID, information like that. We passed that statute several years ago. We now know the criminals are going to marketplaces, what you think of as the chairman said, eBay, OfferUp, LetGo, Alibaba. There's a whole host of them. Facebook Marketplace, all of them. There are several that do it the right way and provide parallel information like pawn shops are required to do. But because they can easily sell products, they don't have to provide an actual image of the product they're selling. Oftentimes, stock photos are used on a marketplace website, and so it looks like a box of Huggies diapers that you would see on a Walgreens or Kroger shelf, but when you get the product, it could be damaged or harm, and this can be a public health safety issue if you think about things that you consume, prescription drugs, over-the-counter prescription drugs, baby formula, things like that. The other thing that is pointed to, and Chairman referenced this, is the increase in felony theft thresholds, not because I think that, and what the argument is that it has allowed organized criminal organizations to take advantage of folks that may have a drug habit they're trying to feed. Or in one instance, sometimes they pay off coyotes or those who are, bringing them into the country illegally, those fees that they hire people to get them across the border, they will force them to steal to pay off that. Or in human trafficking instances, they brought into this country and they're forced to pay off their debt by boosting or stealing. So this chart on the left, what this shows you is that there really has been a direct correlation with the increase in online shopping and the increase in organized retail theft. And this is a few of the statistics about what theft costs Kentuckians. So you can imagine that each Kentuckian is paying about $164 annually more a year in the products they buy because of theft. I want to be clear, theft is not just shoplifting. We are not talking about one-time shoplifters or shoplifters stealing items they can't afford. It's a sophisticated, professional, organized theft groups and criminal networks, and it can negatively impact consumer behavior. It's also not a victimless crime. I think it's important to understand that we often talk about shoplifting as being a victimless crime, but as these events become more violent in nature, they are dangerous for employees, they are dangerous for customers, and so we want to be clear that it's not a victimless crime. It is also harmful to the consumer in two ways. One, it increases prices, and two, it also can be a public health and safety issue. Here is a quote from Corey Berry, she is the CEO of Best Buy, and she says that even though they've added security measures, the shoplifting is traumatizing for our associates, is unacceptable. We're doing everything we can to create as safe an environment as possible. And that they're implementing a number of tactics. In fact, I was at the Best Buy headquarters just this week, and they said, well, we've solidified the front doors, but now they're coming through the ceiling. And they were grateful for that because that meant that no one was in the store when the theft was happening. Now they're concerned that, okay, we've solidified the front. What if we find a way to protect the ceiling and them coming in the building that way, then do they just come in with guns and other violent acts to get the products? It's critical that I'm going to show you an example of this is what we're talking about. So at the center is an organized retail group, and you're talking about them being connected to human trafficking, terrorism, drug trafficking, transnational crimes, particularly in the case of counterfeit items, gang and violent crimes, and those types of things. So how does this work? You have the head of an organization, and they are hiring boosters. It goes through either a fencing operation at one level, or it goes through a wholesaler and distributor, and sometimes can go back to retailers and appear as legitimate products. Oftentimes it goes onto online marketplaces where they can operate anonymously. These are the top types of retailers targeted by these groups. Of course, over-the-counter medications and things in a pharmacy are costly items. Baby formula was a popular theft item even before baby formula shortages. So Home Depots and home improvement stores are also very popular with thieves trying to steal high-priced items that they will sell online. It is, in 2019, this was a $68.9 billion worth of products were stolen from retailers. It's about 1.5% of sales across the country. And retailers faced increased costs, not just because of actually the product going missing, but the technology they have to employ to prevent theft. the labor cost associated with it. We had one member provide us, they are hiring officers, off-duty officers in Louisville. It's about $75 an hour, going up to about $100 an hour. Particularly if a store has multiple incidents, it's harder to get off-duty law enforcement employed there. And then, again, the safety issues. One example is in Florida, a retail theft ring targeted Ulta beauty stores, and they would pepper spray employees. A lot of times, if you see at a home improvement store, they'll load up a cart, and it will be heavy down with big equipment or tools, power tools and things like that, and they will just mow down whoever is in front of them. Consumer, employee, it doesn't matter. You've probably seen the jewelry store thefts or the luxury store theft videos that come out of California. And Walgreens actually closed its store in the San Francisco area because they could not afford to keep the theft that was going. This is the impact on Kentucky's economy. You can see that this impacts multiple sectors across its economy, but it impacts state and local tax dollars as well, to the tune of $54 million. So I think it's important to note that its reach and impact is far wider than just retail. This is what I was talking about. This is an example of what, if you look at theft by sort of severity, it's, retail theft for personal use. You go up to the smash and grabs, which are sometimes gang activity. And then you get up to these national organized transnational criminals that provide, and they are stealing products like medicines, razor blades, health and beauty aids. I know lotions and things are very commonly stolen. So what is a potential solution? There are 11 states that have passed what's called the Interim Act, the Integrity, Notification, and Fairness in Online Retail Marketplaces for Consumers Act. It would require online marketplaces to require high-volume sellers to provide information to the marketplace and consumers, and requires the marketplace to verify this information. This is critical because while you may be able to catch a ring, what happens is law enforcement does not have a way to find that information or verify it. And oftentimes, the criminal will have a storefront, and then they feel like maybe something is happening. They'll shut it down quickly, and they've already started another one, and it's just nothing but dead ends for loss prevention folks and for the law enforcement folks. And then they would have to provide a government ID, a tax ID, bank account information, and contact information. And high-volume sellers are those that meet a certain threshold of sales, 200 transactions in 12 months, and it has to also result in $5,000 or more in aggregate revenue. So what that means is we're not talking about the mom who sells her baby's used clothes on Facebook Marketplace for, $50 or whatever, or someone selling a piece of furniture. We're really talking about someone who has a significantly high number of transactions combined with a significant source of revenue. This protects consumers as well. We really view this as a consumer protection issue because it protects them against getting counterfeit or mishandled or tainted products. It provides law enforcement with a better way to track stolen goods, and it removes that anonymity of sellers, making it less attractive for criminals to use these platforms. And by verifying that this information is correct, it cuts down on those fake stores fronts or moving a storefront to a different name or anything like that. Again, Arkansas was the first state to pass this, and I just did a quick search and pretended like I was a seller. Google had a form right away. It was very simple, very easy. You plopped your information in, and it was very easy to comply with. These are the states that have passed or introduced the Interim Act. Ohio is one of the most recent states that passed it, Michigan, Illinois. So a lot of our folks that are our surrounding states are looking at this or have already passed it. This is the pawnbroker statute that was passed a couple of years ago. I thought this was good reference point to show that what we're really talking about is putting brick and mortar operations that where people sell products through in step with online marketplaces. It's sort of a parity piece is how we view it. This is our organized retail crime definition. So we do have a statute that provides for organized retail crime and what it means. It's two or more persons collaborating or engaging in criminal acts, reselling, stealing the item. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole and Matt now to, I think they will provide you a good lens of what it's like on the ground in managing these issues.
Thank you for having me.
I think you had it. You might just.
Thank you for having me. My name is Nicole Toyloy. I'm the Regional Asset Protection Director for Walgreens for Tennessee and the state of Kentucky. Part of my responsibility, sorry, should I start over? Okay. Part of my responsibility is to oversee some of the investigations in regards to ORC in Kentucky. In the last years, our Walgreens Kentucky stores have suffered $12 million in product losses, 52% worse than what we were at 2 years ago. 23% of those losses are attributed to ORC. With the rise of ORC in our stores, it's become a significant safety and security concern for both our team members and our customers. We've had, in the last 12 months, 15 robberies, 35 threats of violence, 19 violent events, and that's just in the last 12 months in 131 stores. In Kentucky, our Walgreens stores have spent $121,000 annually in locking devices to protect our products from theft. We employ 2 full-time team members who are dedicated just to installing locking devices and repairing locking devices that have been damaged by criminals. In addition to that, we also employ security guards, off-duty law enforcement, and we have a major crimes team that helps us investigate organized retail crime across the country and specifically in Kentucky. The products that are most targeted by these criminals are Advil, Claritin, Prevagen, Crest White Strips, Zyrtec, baby formula, Dove. Several of these products are either ingested or absorbed through the skin. Because consumer safety is such a concern, when they steal these items, they're not worried about expiration dates, they're not worried about storage concerns, and so it poses a significant risk to the public health of our consumers when they're resold on online marketplaces. Consumers, we hope that consumers can feel confident in where their products are coming from, that they're safe and that they're not counterfeit. So we believe the Inform Act would help us in achieving that. Thank you.
Hello, Matt Ross-Deaton, and thank you for having me today. My career history, I've been with retail and Kroger for the past 11 years in investigations. Prior to that, I have a law enforcement background of 10 years, where most of the time I spent as a police detective. I was, to be honest, oblivious to ORC back then, and had you told me that organized crime happened in a grocery store, I probably would have laughed at you. But since coming over to retail on the private side, my eyes have been opened. I had no idea what retail was up against. So I've seen the targets change and methods over the past 11 years since I've been with Kroger. The products are still in demand, such as baby formula, our meats, liquor, a plethora of different OTC items. I've watched that's still in effect, however, change to where just about anything under our roof that has value to it is being targeted by organized crime groups. For instance, the plastics that we put our produce items that we bring from our warehouses over to our stores is targeted. It's stolen from our stores, it's brought to recycling plants, chopped up, and then sent overseas to make new products, in which some retailers may be purchasing in other forms or fashions. to include also things like our oil that we use for frying. We put that in the back of our stores, and that too is stolen by organized retail crime groups. We've had to lock those up, spend money on new vats that had different lockable capabilities to keep them out of it. I've seen the scams change from the late night phone calls, from overseas scammers that target our employees and trick them into loading gift cards by saying that it's me calling and I need to help a customer out quickly, so please load this gift card up for them, or the store manager or the district manager. I've seen that change to now they are online and social media targeting our employees, trying to gain trust with them so that they can eventually take advantage of them and talk them into either committing in collusion with them or just making some kind of transaction that has left us over $20,000 in loss in one single night. I've also seen what retail has done to help themselves. So Kroger, we've spent millions of dollars enacting all types of different security measures, which some that you can see when you go to our stores. You'll see security, you'll see the cameras. Those are all things you visually see. But we've invested in state-of-the-art technology that's tied to our camera systems that looks at skip scanning at our registers. We've tied that state-of-the-art technology to systems that lock up our carts if they don't go through a register and the product's not purchased. So there's been lots of money spent to try to address organized retail crime groups out there and to keep our costs low for consumers. Ultimately, we want to harden the target so we're not an easy victim, which they see us as. Increase year after year. I've seen ORC since I've been employed. I've seen it start out low level, and now it is an intricate syndicate with many, many groups out there that are targeting us. Like Ms. Stiglitz said earlier, it's not a victimless crime that a lot of people see it as. Law enforcement is under the gun as well. They've had to enact different protocols because it's so bad that they've had to, in some jurisdictions, with the lack of manpower and resources, they've had to put protocols in place that limit how much money that they're going to respond to our stores for. So if it's $100, they might not come to it in certain jurisdictions. The felony amounts, I know that some of those have increased there, but I'm thankful that there's still laws that have been put in place that put that target the ORC boosters in aggregate. So they put multiple cases together. That's been very beneficial to both law enforcement, us, and prosecutors. COVID and the ability to use masks. So I've seen it grow exponentially since COVID. Being able to identify these criminals have been extremely difficult for us, law enforcement, and the courts. So we've had to look at other technologies out there to help identify them from different means. And then ultimately with looking at it as victimless, there are some courts that have not always enacted the penalties that were set for these crimes. So all those things the criminals in the ORC element have utilized to their advantage. They know about these things, these different opportunities. They know it's seen as petty. They stay under the thresholds when they come to our store to keep it misdemeanors. The jail penalties, sometimes they're in and out of jail so quickly and right back into our stores doing it all over again. But really, it's gotten tremendous since all these things organized and multiplied. And all of this is to help them, the ORC booster, the fence, begin to get involved in different things that, such as the drug trade. When search warrants are conducted, drugs are often found, guns are often found. These are all elements to what they know as, they're operating under a petty theft. So they use that to their advantage. They hire boosters, these low-level people who are drug addicts, homeless, people in need. They hire them to go out to our stores, commit these acts, and again, they're right back in and out of jail quickly. So I've also seen what was pawn shops as a police detective. That was a great route. It had great oversight to it. It's often where the criminals went to pawn their items and get their money. And so we worked really well with pawnbrokers to establish laws or different means so that we could see who was selling the products, what products they were. And that led to a lot of convictions, a lot of arrests, and kept it low. There was good oversight to it. And now what's taken place is the online marketplaces. There's no oversight. It's the new wild, wild west out there. It's much more profitable. So typically your ORC boosters would bring the product to a fencing location, which was a small business, maybe a convenience store or a flea market, something like that, to sell, and they're getting pennies on the dollar for it. Now why not just get online and sell it for just about retail prices? It's a lot more profitable for them. So you got your booster low level, as Ms. Stiglitz showed in her PowerPoint, how that syndicate can be and how complex these groups can be, and how many different criminal aspects they include, but stay under the radar because it's looked at as a petty theft. So what it's going to take is law enforcement, courts, retail, legislatures working together to keep the wolves at bay. And I believe that this Inform Act is a great step forward to help us do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. I will tell you, a lot of members of this committee are either business owners or law enforcement or have had direct involvement with some of these types of things as I look around the room. So we do have some questions for you. We'll begin with Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Mrs. Stiglitz. Kentucky's criminal syndicate statute, what are the current penalties for that?
Oh, that's a good question that I didn't include in my presentation. I don't know if I remember. I pulled up the B or C. Thank you.
Say that again.
I apologize.
B or C felony? Okay, thank you. So second part of that question is, do you feel that our criminal syndicate statute is adequate to address these issues?
What we have been trying to work with law enforcement groups at all levels, prosecutors and law enforcement directly. We are trying to discover if they're even using the organized retail crime statute. Additionally, are they using the aggregation? And just in our initial meeting with Commonwealth's attorneys, what we discovered is they didn't know about the aggregation statute at all, and utilizing the organized retail crime statute was something that seemed like did not occur quite often. So I think that's the education piece that we have to look to. I think that we can discuss if you think that, if the General Assembly thinks that criminal penalties are there. One thing we didn't discuss is that what some states are doing is within their Attorney General's office, they're forming task forces that would be made up of law enforcement to evaluate and target these cases. That does seem to be another piece of the puzzle that is effective, but that has a cost to it.
Thank you. And if I could have just one follow-up, finish up here. So that's you're getting to the gist of it. If there's only so much we can do, right?
Correct.
If law enforcement and is not enforcing the existing law and prosecutors aren't prosecuting, then there's not a lot we can do. And if we have these defund the police type movements, that doesn't help either. So I guess this final question would be, do we know percentages of cases that are actually solved and percentages of prosecutions on these cases? Do we have that information at all? I would assume it's a pretty low number.
That is correct for these organized retail crime. We do not have good crime statistics. I've discovered this is an issue across the country for determining what is going on, and even specifically in Kentucky, to see how it's being prosecuted. But that's why we had Nicole talk about her experience, and she may be able to add some color of what their charges and getting a resolution in these cases.
I don't have any really good statistics about arrests and prosecutions, but I will say a lot of these offenders, when they are caught, because they're low level, they're employing, as Matt said, drug users and homeless people to commit a lot of these acts. A lot of times we find that they're being released within 24, 48 hours, and they're right back in our stores committing the same issues. So we're not seeing any real sentencing around these
So it
crimes.
sounds like law enforcement and prosecutors aren't following it up the chain. They're not tying the two crimes together. They're going after the low-level offender with little to no repercussions, and then not using the existing criminal syndicate statute to go after the high-level offenders, which is probably based a time issue. How time and resources. Is that fair? Is that how you see it?
Yes, and that is absolutely fair. It is a question of time and resources for law enforcement, and I think education. And we recognize that we have a responsibility to be part of that solution. I think the other piece to that is for law enforcement, they have to be able to prove their case. And if it takes 6 months for an online marketplace to give them the identity of a seller that they've identified is one of these rings, then there's no way they're going to be able to prove a case. And so this Inform Act is a mechanism and a tool for law enforcement, retailers, and the consumer, because that way they know who they're buying the product from, and there's a responsibility. Mr. Rothstein gave me an example of where they put stickers on, if found, please call, with a store number. It means it's a stolen product, and he's had customers buy products off of a marketplace and then call with a store number and say, I think I bought a stolen product off an online marketplace.
Thank you.
I will point out, too, part of the reason we're to bring this is that with all the discussion we've had in the last 3 or 4 years about criminal justice reform, reform works both ways. It doesn't just mean that we're trying to lessen the amount of people that are incarcerated and trying to get them treatment. It also means that in certain cases we might need to tighten our laws, to toughen our laws to make sure that people are held accountable. And I think when you've seen these smash and grab things that are happening, I saw an article last night, or an interview, I guess, on TV, that the criminals know that in those situations where they're not coming in and prosecuting if it's less than $100 or less than $500, they know. And so they just come in and right in broad daylight, and they know that they're not going to have, authorities come to them. So they just take it and then they market it. So, that could be coming our way. And, obviously we see a lot of that out of California. With that, I'll turn to Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for the presentation. And with law enforcement, it is something that they do follow up on, but it is very difficult. The best chance for law enforcement to develop a case like this is when you catch a suspect, you get into their car, and you find thefts from many different stores over many different days, and so that's the initiation of that. In our part of the state, it was difficult because they would always cross state lines, come in and then hit stores and then go out. So it is a very difficult process. But as a country, we have in many ways legitimized this lawlessness over the last few years. The things that we have allowed in our Commonwealth during those times have not helped in this area either. The criminal justice reform, the way that we victimize or we label criminals as victims in many ways, we give them ways out of paying for the crime that they committed. Drug addict, you're not going to go to jail. You're going to go to treatment. It's a whole cycle. They're out doing it again, and this happens time and time again. So what you all are presenting to us, it's not going to get any better. Until we change our philosophy and we go back to treating criminals as criminals and holding them accountable for what they do, it's not going to get any better. And, and I think this body within the legislature, I think we are going to have to rethink at some point the direction we're headed in, because I think we're going in the wrong direction in many ways when it comes to this, and we all pay the price for that. We look at it as a victimless crime. We look at it that the perpetrator is a drug user. So we give all of these ways out to avoid accountability. My question is, with Walgreens, the numbers that you mentioned, do you have a breakdown to what parts of the state, and I'm sure in the urban areas those numbers are higher, with your stores? Do you have the top 5 cities or counties?
I don't, but most of our stores are located within Louisville, Lexington, so most of that's going to be actually coming out of the Louisville area.
Have you all seen a spike in Louisville the last few years?
Yes.
A tremendous spike?
Yes.
There's a message in that, folks.
Representative Cantrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a couple of questions. I wanted to address Senator Wise's question first. I actually did some research on this during the meeting and about the engaging in organized crime statute, and I looked it up where you referenced the KRS 506.120, and that is a C felony. All theft statutes are included in that statute, and I think I read a Courier Journal article from Hardin County in 2020 where 5 people from Illinois were engaging in organized crime. That was one of the charges that they actually brought, the organized crime charge. And they also charged receiving $10,000 in stolen property or more and theft by unlawful taking / shoplifting between $500 and $10,000. And those 5 people, it was alleged that they were engaging in an interstate crime ring from Illinois to Georgia, and they were caught here in Kentucky in Hardin County. They were charged with the appropriate offense, including the new organized crime law, and were sentenced to 5 years, and under that they would have to serve 85% of their sentence. And so I thought that was an interesting thing that I read while looking at this that might address some of the members' questions about how well prosecutors know about this or charging it and utilizing it. That really had nothing to do with the questions that I raised my hand to ask, but I thought that was interesting. My first question is, if you would mind going back to the slide about the Inform Act. My question is about the administration of that. So you have the slide on there that says what the retailers are required to do. What happens after that? So they're required to put in all their information and report to the online marketplace. Who has access to that? And then how are they catching people? Like, for example, is law enforcement monitoring those transactions? Is the online marketplace monitoring those transactions and then reporting it as somehow suspicious to law enforcement, and then they might initiate an investigation? What happens after this reporting that's required under the Inform Act?
They report the information to the marketplace, and the marketplace has to verify it. And then if there is law enforcement looking to build a case, a retail group looking for to build a case, they would be able to better track that those products are stolen. There is a law firm out of Ohio, chairman that works for many retailers, and they will do sort of sample buys of things to see if they're stolen products. If you think about Walgreens has branded products of its own, and if it's going on to a marketplace that's not connected with it or not, and it's their product and it's in bulk, they may know it's stolen. But what they can't do is it's completely anonymous in many cases to sell these products. And so this gives not just the information to the consumer, but it makes it available to law enforcement, and the marketplace verifies it. And Mr. Rothstein might want to talk about his experience in working with some of the marketplaces and some of the systems they used to do.
Thank you. So, yeah, I've actually absolutely worked cases where we have had very good online marketplaces that do collect this information and do share it with law enforcement, and that has aided in their investigations and helped locate the fencing location. We're allowed police departments to put different devices on vehicles, track it to see where the bigger fish is, where the big syndicate is. So it starts low level and continues to go higher, but it all starts at some of these little small spots that are selling it online. So the ones that are helpful and work with us have been great in solving big, large-scale ORC investigations.
Thank you. And I just have one more question. You mentioned that it wouldn't the statute would not apply to someone, for example, who wanted to sell or make a transfer of their child's toys or clothing that they had outgrown or something like that. What about other retailers that exist online? I was thinking about like Amazon or Etsy. That's clearly an online marketplace. They're clearly going to, if you're operating a business on one of those platforms and, hopefully you're generating more than $5,000. But I think we all know a lot of those are legitimate businesses that a lot of us, like to, purchase from, and that would be unnecessarily, putting some more burdens on those small businesses. How can we balance that a little bit better?
I mean, if they were a brick and mortar business, they would go to the Secretary of State's office and they would get a business license. They would have a tax ID. They would do all of the things that that the Inform Act would require them to do if they had if they were a legitimate business. And so it is not. It's simply providing information and data. And yes, there will be some small businesses that will have more than 200 transactions and $5,000 in revenue, but you're talking about basic information. And I think too, you want to be, if you're a legitimate small business doing this, you want your customer to know you're a legitimate small business, just like our brick and mortar retailers would want to know. And so providing this information, while it may seem another step, I don't think it's too much to ask, just like it's not too much to ask that we go to the Secretary of State's office and get a business license and do all those pieces.
Thank y'all, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will remind our members, we have about 8 to 10 minutes, and we got to wrap this up so we can give our presenter adequate time. But with that, I'll move on to Representative Kulkarni. Did you have a question?
I did, and I had 3, but I'll just ask one. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you all for presenting this morning, or this afternoon. I just wanted, everybody's kind of talked about what's being stolen, and it's been brought up by a couple of my colleagues. I was curious if you all had any data, and maybe it's in that report that was referenced in 3 or 4 of the slides, I think ACAMS. Could you email that to me if possible? I'd like to see the full report. And really my question is, all of you mentioned baby formula, for instance. So, and a lot of the products that you mentioned being stolen seemed like necessities rather than fun things. My question is where, and I know you mentioned, for instance, a lot of your stores, Walgreens, are in Louisville, but a distribution of where, even if it's national, if you don't have that data specifically for Kentucky, what is being stolen, a distribution of that, if there's any data points for that, and then when are they being stolen most? Are there peaks and surges of when these items are being stolen, for instance, in times of economic hardship? And so I don't expect you all to have all those answers, but just point me in the direction of that report if that's where they are, or you can get back to me on the rest of it. And then one quick follow-up, which also you can just get me that information later. I was curious about this $5,000 aggregate revenue seems low to me given the volume of sales that occur online. I'm curious as to the average revenue of what would be considered a high-volume seller under the Inform Act, and then just a percentage of fake accounts that we know about, or that I don't know if the FBI tracks it or whoever is tracking it, just a sort of estimate of that. Thank you.
I will point out, too, I'm going to follow up to that just this way. If you could get us, the committee, some samples of the various pieces of legislation that were filed, that's a good start for us if we're drafting. So like you indicated, one just passed in Ohio, our sister state. So if you could get us some of that legislation specifically, that also would help us identify this. Now we'll turn to Senator Schickel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so happy to see the respected Kentucky Retail Federation and its partners here to testify on this important issue. And I just want to echo the things that Senator Carroll said and Senator West said. I think he did it very well. But then also I want to reflect a little bit on the history of this problem, because this problem does have a long history. You know, there might be one or two people in the room can remember back in the 70s when we made this crime a police officer could arrest on probable cause. It was the only misdemeanor that you could do that. We had to change the law to do that because in the 70s, shoplifting was so terrible and we needed to take action, and we did, and we curbed that back in the 70s. But I don't think there's any doubt that we as a legislature have sent a loud and clear, soft on crime message ever since I've been in the legislature, and given people a pass on many of these crimes which you're talking about. So it should be no surprise now that we have this huge problem. I'm wondering, have you talked to any of your partners, such as the state chamber, who has really been pushing and lobbying for a lot of these things which have brought us to this place? That'd be my first question. Then I do have a follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schickel. We're happy to be here with you today, as always, as well. We have had, we did inform the Kentucky Chamber that we would be testifying on this issue today. But I will also, and they didn't tell me what their position was, but I did inform them that the U.S. Chamber has a lot of good information about organized retail crime and is supportive of a Reform Act at a national level.
And the follow-up is, I was watching on some news channel, actually the stock prices of some of these big retail organizations, I think, which some of you represent today, has been affected by not being able to absorb these huge losses in retail theft that is going on right now. Is that true? Is that a fact?
That is true. If you look at the slide where the Best Buy's quote, this was from Best Buy's earnings call that they had, where she said it is starting to impact their bottom line. And if you think about the products Best Buy has, you're talking about high cost items, but very easy to, or popular to sell. And so, yes, that is as testified by Ms. Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Representative Bratcher.
Quickly, do you, when your organization decides where to go, say open a new location or shut down a location, I'm sure you look at a lot of like the median income and just the whole area demographics, whatever. Do you ever look at this? Have you ever seen something where you wouldn't go into a city or a county or anywhere in America, Walgreens and Kroger? I'm sure you're multi-state. Do you know of this impacts that at all? Shutting down a business or opening a business?
I'm not sure the impacts of opening a business in a certain location based on that, but definitely the impacts of ORC can help make the decision to shut a business in a location because of it.
I saw some what do you call them? Crash and grab? Is that what it's called? I've seen Kroger
Smash and grabs.
I've seen Kroger go through that. I mean, if you can trust the videos on YouTube and whatnot, I've seen that happen, and just wondering if that affects your business model.
Absolutely. So those are considerations that our company looks at when opening a new store, or just in general on security that we're putting at those stores, or what resources we're allocating to address those issues. So absolutely, it affects our bottom line.
And just a quick another point on that, being a pharmacy, when we do have to make the tough decision to close a location, you're really impacting the community as a whole. There are several people who might be limited by transportation, who might lose access to a pharmacy. So it is a pretty big deal for us when we have to make that decision to close a business as a result of organized retail crime.
All right, we have two more questions, and we'll do these quickly. And I will suggest that we might, and as we go through this interim, we've done this in times past, we can have an unofficial work group, if you will, to get more data concerning this as we consider writing legislation. Representative Nemes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Retail Association. Ms. Stiglitz, you always bring this issue and always do well when you present. This is not a victimless crime. It's a big problem. It's not only a problem for our owners, and it doesn't only happen at Kroger's and Walgreens. It also happens at gas stations. And there's very few things I think that are worse than thieves. And we need to address thieves, and we need to make sure that everybody's prices aren't going up because there are thieves that are just trying to get something for free. I do want to note that the location that you mentioned that was closed, the Walgreens you closed, has a prosecutor that has said that they're not going to prosecute. So I think we're in the wrong forum here. And the reason I say that is I think judges need to do a better job of keeping repeat offenders in jail and not letting them out so quickly. I think prosecutors need to go after these kinds of things. But our laws on the conduct that we're talking about today subject someone to prison for 5 to 10 years. That's pretty doggone serious. I don't know how much more serious the General Assembly needs to be. Is 20 enough? 5 to 10 seems to me like that's appropriate. So I don't think we need a law change for these syndicates because we've got 5 to 10 already on the books. It's already a Class C felony. I think we need to be harsh on these folks. I think our law is very harsh on these folks. But I would also mention, because I think as a matter of clarity for the citizens that are watching, I know there's a lot of talk about soft on crime and we're too soft on crime. Since I've been here for 6 years, I can think of 2 instances where we've reduced crime, arguably, but I can think of dozens and dozens and dozens where we've enhanced crime. So I don't think this General Assembly has been soft on crime. And if anybody's received that message, I think they're not getting the real message. Then the 2 areas, by the way, are expungements, which are not really relative to what we're talking about. And the other area is we've increased the felony threshold limit to 1,000. But in doing that, we put the aggregate there, which is very helpful to our retailers. So if any citizen is getting a message that this General Assembly is soft on crime, they're getting the wrong message. Factually, that is wrong. We've enhanced dozens of crimes in the last 6 years and reduced, arguably, the ones I've just identified. And the conduct that we're talking today, and I'm going to make this point and I'll be quiet. I'm going to make it again because I think it's a huge point. 2 things. 1, we need to focus we need to put the focus where it needs to be. It's not on new laws. It's on enforcement of the laws that already exist. Second point, final point I've already made, I'm going to make because I think it's the biggest point. This conduct is already a Class C felony. You can go to prison in Kentucky today for the conduct that we're talking about for 10 years. I don't know what more the legislature should do on that. I know we're all very upset about it. My constituents are very upset about it. This is a major problem that our government needs to get control of. But it's already a Class C felony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And last question, Representative Flannery. His first question as a new committee member.
I have 2 questions.
Be brief. Don't make me gavel you down in the first meeting.
Is the reporting data accessible to police agencies, or is it only accessible to online marketplaces?
The data that, if Inform were to be enacted, would the data be accessible to law enforcement? Our understanding is yes, that it would be. They would be required to.
And the second part, I don't know how uniform the Inform Act is with the 11 or so states that have passed this, but it seems to me that the 5,000 or more seems somewhat maybe low on its face, but I think that when you're really talking about organized crime, assuming they are very organized, they could actually create multiple sellers that are there to make sure that they don't meet that threshold. So I'm kind of curious if there have been instances in other states where they've went lower than 5,000 to prevent these organized crime syndicates from basically just creating multiple accounts on these marketplaces to sell to do an end run around that threshold.
So Arkansas was the first state to pass it, and they don't have the and requirement where it's 200 transactions and this revenue. They have, it's if you have 2,200 or more transactions or 5,000 in revenue. There are many states that are working, discussing with marketplaces through our national organizations and everything to get the language to work with them to reach a compromise on this language so that it is easier for them to administer but it still serves its purpose. I cannot answer your specific questions about have other states experienced, because we're talking about this is just brand new coming in the last 2 years or so. I think Arkansas was maybe passed it 3 years ago. And again, theirs is very different than other states. And so I don't think we have data from other states to prove your point. And I will say, to Representative Nemus's point, I was very sensitive to not wanting to appear as if we were looking for enhanced criminal penalties or our criminal statutes. But I think that what we are saying and what we want you to understand is we want accountability and transparency and consumer protections. And that is what this is about. It is taking away an easy opportunity for criminals to take advantage of those who are addicted to drugs. We are excited about the pilot that is being launched where, you are having folks who have a habit get treatment. We recognize how necessary treatment is. And so that's why we see this as the solution, along with, if you wanted to look at a task force, but we recognize that costs dollars. And so this would be a first important step.
I want to thank everybody here. This was obviously spawned a lot of questions. We can talk about the work group going forward. Thank you for bringing that to us. If you could get that information to Representative Kulkarni and get us a copy of the proposed legislation in other states, that would be great.
I will absolutely do that.
With that, we're going to transition quickly into our next presenter, who comes to us from North Carolina, and he's making his way forward now. And we're doing that to give him as much time as possible. And thank you all for being here today. And with that, Mr. Brock, if you want to come forward, we'll let you identify yourself, tell the committee who you are. I will color this by saying this. We reviewed some videos that Mr. Brock set in advance, and it's dealing with a lot of issues of the day. So if he plays some of those videos, it may show you protest that happened around the country based on things such as the abortion case being overruled. It made things about the mask. It made things about guns and those kinds of things. What we're trying to do with this presentation, we talked about this a year ago, is that, one of the things that we've been mindful about is our own Capitol security, the protection for our members, the protection for our staff, the protection for our constituents that come here. And we want to make sure that that's a safe place. And I know that this year there was a change in the road place out between the annex and the Capitol. And what I learned is that was actually a suggestion from the Secret Service almost 10 years ago to basically make sure that we are safe while we're here on campus, if you will, because somebody made a very good comment of a well-placed truck bomb at that roadway could have taken out all three branches of government at one time in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So with those things in mind, there is a group that deals with these Capitol security issues, threats, etc. Mr. Brock has been in the midst of that. I'll ask him to identify himself, maybe talk about NLSSA a little bit, and then let him go right into his presentation. So Mr. Brock, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to visit your beautiful, beautiful state. So I'm Chief Brock. I'm the chief of the North Carolina General Assembly Police Department. Our legislature has their own police department that has statewide jurisdiction that protects the members, visitors, and staff to the North Carolina General Assembly. I'm the former president of the National Services and Security Association from NCSL. I'm also a professor of criminal justice, and I teach crowd control and protest management and consult with police departments on protest all over the country through that organization and through invitation. Unfortunately, I've had experiences with a lot of large protests, and I go to other states when there's protests to watch. I also help various law enforcement agencies identify protesters, who their leaders are, what their tactics are. Are they going to be confrontational? Are they going to be violent? Are they just going to commit acts of civil disobedience? So I've kind of specialized in this area. For time purposes, I'm going to try to move through the presentation fairly quickly. I do have some recent news clips of some recent events because I want to focus on capital or specific legislative security, because what we've seen with the George Floyd protest and with the Dobbs decision, that protests are coming to your front door. We've seen sit-ins around the country in leadership offices. We've seen gallery disruptions. We've seen people try to kick the doors down of the Arizona Capitol while they were in session, and members had to shelter in place. And one of the things we've seen, armed protests, and I know various states have various rules. Armed protests become very dangerous if you have opposing groups. We've seen people in galleries with guns shouting at members while they're voting throughout the country. We've seen major acts of civil disobedience. I managed the arrest of 151 people back in 2011 at a large North Carolina protest. So this is not about whether abortion should be legal or not. This is how to conduct legislative sessions and vote on the issues as democracy demands in a safe manner. And before I go any further, I want to say I completely believe in the First Amendment. The components of the First Amendment of speech, assembly, petition should be protected. And I've sworn an oath as all law enforcement officers to protect that right to protest. But we're talking about safety, security, and when the First Amendment becomes crime. When state representatives and senators are being threatened, harassed, one of the things I will recommend, and I strongly want you to consider this, several states are looking at enacting legislation to protect members and their families and their neighbors at their residence. Imagine right now if you were here voting on or having a committee meeting on any controversial legislation, and there was a group of people outside your house on public sidewalk screaming, hollering, and yelling because of the position you're going to take. How would your spouse feel? How would your neighbors feel? How would your kids feel? These are all issues that are happening, and we have seen these residential protests both for federal and state elected officials. So, without further ado, I will get into the presentation. All right. Over 2 days, we had to clear the gallery. Several arrests were made as hundreds of protesters stood outside the gallery and banged on the glass. That was 2016, I believe. So about 23 arrests over 2 days, clearing the gallery, multiple stop and stops of session. Just because the members could not hear the debate, and it was so disrupted that they had to stop and start several times. Again, I've gotten really involved with protest management and presentations through NLSSA, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Here's a few clips of recent events that have occurred in Virginia, Arizona, Oregon, Michigan, Texas twice, and of course us in North Carolina. So some of the things I want you to think about, not just today, but after I leave. You know, current state law, with some current building procedures, evacuation and shelter-in-place procedures. Recently, Arizona had to lock down while they were trying to enact legislation. Armed protests, and I know that gets dicey with the Second Amendment, but remember, if you have armed protests with multiple opposing groups, that can become a dangerous situation. Handling large groups in fire code, we've seen a lot of sit-ins. So I would recommend, if you haven't done so, you get the fire marshal to figure out how many people will fit into your office legally. Because if people super exceed that number, then they can be trespassed and asked to be removed or be removed by law enforcement. I can show you examples of that as well. We know, I understand that your state Supreme Court's rendered a decision or is about to render a decision. We know the 2020 or expect the 2024 national elections and the upcoming midterm elections may be controversial and with heated emotions from both sides. So you should expect protests even at your capital to increase. I've mentioned threats, doxing, and shaming. I know most of the younger young people in the room. Doxing is when you take a member's personal information, such as where their kids work, where their spouses work, where their kids go to school, where they go to church. You put it out on over the internet, and then you ask people to go protest them. And again, personal and residential protests are increasingly becoming more frequent.
Thousands of people gathered in Virginia for a pro-gun rally Monday. Demonstrators flooded the streets by the Capitol building. Many carried weapons and wore camouflage gear. But despite worries about the possibility of violent confrontations, the event was peaceful. Organizers say they were protesting new gun control legislation making its way through the state Senate. The bills include limiting handgun purchases and
has been almost 24 hours since the historic and controversial decision by the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. Reactions, of course, unfolding here in Arizona at the state capitol overnight when these protests turned to this.
Coming into our newsroom this morning, we have new video that shows the moment the protesters made their way to the doors of the Capitol, and then another view ends up showing us how people ended up throwing themselves up against the doors. We also have cell phone video from inside where lawmakers were, showing us the view as it unfolded from in there.
Yeah, and in just minutes, you could see after that flash bangs into the crowd, sending thousands running in different directions, forcing our crews to take cover as well.
Now, that chaos happened today as the Oregon legislature held a third special session today to consider $800 million in relief for Oregonians. Our Lindsay Nadrich is live in Salem with what happened down there today. Lindsay?
Yeah, hey guys, I'm here inside the Capitol building. The House is actually still in session just through these doors here. The Capitol building itself is closed to the public today due to COVID-19 restrictions. And earlier today, Oregon State Police closed off the street as the group of protesters marched up and down the block, waving Trump flags and chanting things like USA. Protesters also tried to break into the Capitol building at least twice. The group was able to get inside once this morning, and police say troopers were sprayed with bear spray. 2 people were arrested during that incident. We also watched another protester in a gas mask get arrested outside the building after he approached a side door. Then around
with a chaotic day both inside and outside the State House in Lansing, protesters demanding the state open back up for business as legislators say they are going to let the state of emergency expire at midnight.
Some of those protesters even managed to get inside the gallery of the House chamber, some of them with guns.
So let's get right to Rod Maloney here as we come to you at 5 o'clock.
In Austin tonight, hundreds of protesters gathered at the federal courthouse plaza and marched to the Capitol. Pro-choice advocates say what the Supreme Court has done is taken away a fundamental right. Fox 7 Austin's Bridget Spencer joins us live from the state capitol with the latest.
Yeah, Rebecca, as you said, that protest started at about 5 o'clock at the federal courthouse. Take a look. You can see this is where it ended up, right here at the gates of the Capitol building. This number has dwindled down quite a bit. It was quite large earlier, and many people we spoke to who have attended this rally, they're saying they're visibly angry at that decision that came down. And meanwhile, those who are pro-life are celebrating big today.
Tonight, safety concerns around the Texas State Capitol after armed protesters showed up for the first day of the legislative session.
There were no acts of violence, but it comes after the FBI warned armed demonstrations are being planned at all 50 state capitals.
All right, for time, I'll be brief on this video. And I'll explain it. So we had a HB2 protest a few years, maybe 18, somewhere in that time frame. Well, several hundred people showed up, and as many people as could filed into the speaker's office and refused to leave. So we had to start arresting people. One individual we had to pick up and carry out and charged him with resisting arrest because he made it quite difficult to remove him. So I would suggest, if you haven't done so, look at your fire code numbers for your galleries and for your offices, because you could have to experience this. And I will say, for the staff in the room, it's a lot of times members may not be there, and it can be very frightening for the staff, whether they're there, members are there or not. I'll show you the brief clip of carrying the individual in a little bit. All right, so we know that protests are happening increasingly across the country. The Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, and I know you guys are real familiar with that. The recent George Floyd protests, there were various degrees of protests at all 50 capitals. Some took a lot of damage, and a lot of law enforcement officers were assaulted or injured. Some of the tactics that you may consider thinking about: blocking entrances and streets. We see a lot of streets, individuals will go lay down as if they're dying, or they'll fasten themselves with chains and sleeping dragons and devices to doors. They'll sing, chant, yell. I hear some of the songs in my sleep. Whether you're at a protest in North Carolina or a protest in California, they sing a lot of the same songs. So, name calling, sit-ins, and blocking streets again. Using their bodies as dead weight. That's a photo of me and my staff removing a protester that was screaming, hollering, refusing to leave. Leaking arms. Climbing. A lot of the environmentalists will climb or try to climb to the top of their capitals and drop very large banners, and they're very skilled at it. Real quick, I'll try to show you us removing. This was our speaker's office.
Sir. Stop with this.
No. Stop on work. You gotta walk in.
Oh, okay.
Our local news media was right outside the door filming everything, and what you can't see is the courtyard is full shoulder to shoulder of people. So it was a rather large protest. I mentioned they're skilled climbers and like to drop very large banners. Protester devices, we see that they're using sleeping dragons. Sleeping dragons is very frequent. It's moved to the East Coast. In a minute, I can show you an example where protesters took sleeping dragons and attached themselves right outside our governor's mansion to close down the street right before rush hour. There is a way to go to the Center of Domestic Preparedness. They provide free training on how to safely extract people from these devices.
Could you maybe tell us what a sleeping dragon is? That's a term I've never heard before.
Yes, sir. A sleeping dragon is a protester device. They They start as small as PVC pipes or go as big as 5-gallon drums filled with concrete. The goal of a sleeping dragon is to delay removal. So when our state was looking at some hydraulic fracturing legislation, protesters would come to the government buildings and chain themselves and attach pipes to the doors so that the media would come. The goal is to delay them being removed so they can advocate for their issue. And I'll show you an example of one right here. They can come very fast and cause a great deal of disruption. Again, this is outside the North Carolina governor's mansion, and I will fast forward for time. That's what it looks like. So what you have is a PVC or metal pipe. You have a choke chain on this end of the wrist. You have a carabiner hooked to a bolt or screw inside. If I grab your arm and try to pull you, it makes the chain tighter, making you bleed. You will scream like you're dying. The legal advisors will stand there with their green hats and note everything and prepare the lawsuits against you. So what you have to do is take your time and safely extract them. And there's methods to do that. And this training is free through the Department of Homeland Security for law enforcement. It's ironic because I wrote a portion on protester devices for our police academy, and then the revision, and then a few years later it happened outside our governor's mansion.
I have a mom that is this brave. Ain't no power in the power of the people. Stop our movement. Legalize communities.
So basically what they do is they come and put blankets around them, and they come and take devices that stabilize, and then they take tools off of fire trucks and safely cut in, defeat the bolt, where then you undo the carabiner. These people want to delay extraction, but they don't want to get hurt. And these are examples outside of government buildings. Bicycle locks around their neck. Most of the time the key will be hidden on their person or nearby. They also like to climb. Now, we thought this was going to be a big issue with the pipeline, but after the current administration stopped that, these protests stopped in frequency. But anytime hydraulic fracturing or natural gas comes up, these type of protests come up. They'll get close to power lines, and they'll make it really scary for law enforcement professionals to want to touch them, because they'll have a noose around their neck, but they're attached to a harness in the chair. All you got to do is know how to be certified to safely remove them. They're not going to hang themselves. Again, we generally find these people not to put themselves in harm's way, but they want to look like they're in extreme harm's way because it draws more media attention. Masks and costumes became a real issue. Most states didn't allow costumes at protests. Of course, COVID changed that. So identifying people and anonymity becomes a big problem, because if someone's smashing glass, throwing bricks, lasering law enforcement, trying to blind them, if their identity is completely concealed, there's no way to try to apprehend them or arrest them by surveillance later. One thing to consider, too, as we've seen both on the national and state level, is member protest. And I know this is a real touchy subject. I just want to say, have a plan, because if members go and join an active protest that's been deemed unlawful, how are you going to want law enforcement to respond if it's civil disobedience only? If it becomes violent, our speaker was in the middle of a very violent George Floyd protest, not by design. He was in his apartment, and the protest was happening all around him. So we had to send officers there to go make sure we could extract him safely if we needed to. So in that particular case, it just was he was living in a high complex close to our Capitol. That's where the protest broke out. So his safety was of concern. The one thing I will tell you is that be careful. Most organized protests, the Lawyers Guild will be there. They're generally second-year college students or first-year attorneys, and they make money by suing law enforcement and state agencies if they violate someone's First Amendment right or if they use excessive force and so forth. Generally, they're readily identifiable with a green hat. We learned a lot of intelligence and about protester tactics during the George Floyd because it's become quite sophisticated. They'll use umbrellas and shields, man-made shields, to protect against impact devices. You'll see protesters, as mentioned earlier, carrying gas masks, which is generally a sign that it's going to be more than peaceful. We had frozen water bottles being thrown, and sometimes the bottles had other liquid in them other than water throughout the country. Tennis balls. Another thing we saw was fireworks directed at law enforcement throughout various protests. And another tactic, and I think it may have been, in one of the state capitals, a counter-protest broke out a few years back, and the protesters were using bear mace to attack each other. That's another real frequent tactic. So that's, again, very dangerous. This is a bill that Florida recently passed, and this was a bill that the governor signed into law, and it was to make trespassing at someone's residence easier, basically in layman's terms, if they were doing it to intimidate the members or people in the residence. Our speaker introduced the bill that increased penalties if there were vandalism, assault, injuries during protest or during what would be determined a riot. It increased those penalties. That bill was vetoed, but other states have, since George Floyd, looked at increasing penalties when there's vandalism, looting, assaults, injuries, etc. I know that was quick. I have provided the material with the clerk, and I have also some other information on what some other states have done that I will be providing, as well as some other protest information for your review. And I'll be glad to take any questions at this time.
One thing I want to add and encourage maybe some of the members. I know that this coming week, and I don't know what's going to happen with respect to a special called session, but the NLSSA has an annual meeting every year where they gather and they discuss these things and talk about how to make our capitals safer for the members, for the constituents, for participants, and not that we're discouraging, as he indicated. They support the First Amendment. That's never been the issue. We're certainly, people have a right to a peaceful protest. The issue is that can develop quickly and can put people in harm's way, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So I'm going this coming week, but I know that we had another representative that had backed out because of the concern of the special session. I've not seen many senators there, and I would encourage somebody, if they would want to attend that, to potentially be involved in that. And the reason I say that is because in the past 2 years, we have had legislation that's presented that has not made it through either chamber, both chambers, that dealt with some of these things, given what happened with respect to some of the protests that arose in one of our larger cities. So, and I know that's a very sensitive topic, and I understand that, but at the end of the day, we're also trying to provide for people's safety. People certainly have a right to voice their opinions. They have a right to peaceful protest, but those can elevate and get out of control very quickly. So I would encourage, if you've not done that, many of you attend NCSL. Well, this is an offshoot of NCSL. So if you want to have more information on that, we will try to get that for you. I know last year, many of our security personnel from Kentucky attended. I think we had Officer Treadway. We had Tim Bradley was there with us. And so I would just encourage you to think about that. With that, I'm going to turn to Senator Wheeler.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation, Mr. Brock. But based on your experience, are most of these violent protests, and I guess violent where they're actually physically assaulting members, threatening members, or ones where they refuse to leave a campus after they're instructed to do so by law enforcement due to a safety violation? Are these mainly left-wing groups that are organizing these protests, or would you consider them right-leaning groups?
From my experience, I would say that 97% of both sides tend to advocate for their cause. I would also say that in most protests, especially recently, you'll have 3% or so of both sides that want to be agitators and hijack events and look to cause mayhem or to make a peaceful protest more chaotic or violent. The Dallas shooting that killed 4 police officers was organized by a lot of faith leaders, and they made from the outset that they wanted a peaceful protest. Hundreds of people were going to march peacefully. One individual climbed to the top of a building and shot and killed 4 police officers. So I wouldn't say it's right or left, and I would say most people want to peacefully protest. Large crowds create a management problem, and if one person starts shooting off fireworks or firing off a gun, it becomes a very chaotic, unsafe scene.
One thing that ties into that you mentioned at a presentation I saw that you gave elsewhere was that despite the fact that protests are planned that are intended to be peaceful, there are other groups that their purpose is to hijack these protests, if you will, to turn them into something more than it is. In order to bring attention to their cause or their mindset. I know that when you talked about it, you went over various gangs and different groups and identified groups that had notoriety for doing that. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, generally a protest organizers want to do it on the First Amendment peacefully. The problem is when counter protesters come, they immediately will try to get in the face of the others, and then that's when it becomes more confrontational. And we see both race extremist groups do that. We see both, whether pro-life or pro-choice, do that. And we certainly see that on identity issues. If you have a conservative group that wants to have conservative values, they will be a handful of non-traditional values, and they will try to come and make it into a chaotic scene. There are black nationalists who will go in downtown Charlotte and they will just scream the most horrific things at people walking by, because what they want to do is get a got you moment to put on YouTube to make the other side look wrong and their side look right. So it's the troublemakers in these controversial that come to these things that try to turn these things upside down, called hijacking an event. We see it in race identity, we see it in abortion, and we see it in the Second Amendment. And we see it in environmental groups quite often.
Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I also have a yellow brick in my office, so it's good to see you. Since I have been here 8 years now, the day I walked in the door, I was allowed access to the second floor. Nobody knew who I was. Somebody gave me their card and said, "Here you go." And since that day, working with Captain Palmer when he was here, there have been numerous efforts to work on the security, all security aspects of this campus. We have gotten as far up as working with Homeland Security and groups at that level. We were never able to get meetings with the top level, with leadership within the legislature and the executive branch and the legislative branch, getting everyone together. There have been changes made over the years that have tightened security up to some levels, but we're still working on efforts to develop a commission that would oversee all of these changes and do appropriations and just make decisions in a structured manner. So we are working in that direction to make changes here, and we have had security surveys from the Secret Service a couple different times. We've had one in recently, but we lack in a lot of ways on this campus, and we need to invest more as a legislature on the security, not just for this building, but for the Capitol also. And but it needs to be done in a structured, bipartisan effort, and those are the struggles that I think we've had over the years. But I just want members, especially those that are new, to know that there have been efforts made for many, many years to make changes. Some success, but not to the level that we would like to see. So, Mr. Chairman, I compliment you for having our guest here today to go over this. I think it is a very important issue, and my biggest fear has always been we're not going to take substantial steps until it's too late. And I'm afraid that if we don't take those steps soon and very proactive steps, it's going to end up in people getting hurt. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator. And I would like to say that I pretty much expected as much. I had kind of picked you out as an alumni. Anyway, the unfortunately thing, as you know, is that law enforcement is very reactive, and you're exactly right. Unfortunately, it'll take an incident where someone gets real scared or someone gets hurt or worse, and then there's a tendency to go too far. And that's why I think it's a good idea. Sometimes, we couldn't be in a more political place right now, legislature opposing parties, but security measures need to be enhanced in a structured way. We as well use the Secret Service and Homeland Security, but it's far better to start increasing security for the future than to wait till the event happens. If you had a bomb threat, if any state were to have a bomb threat while trying to enact legislation on current issues, the very next day their law enforcement officers would start training in evacuation, because most likely if they hadn't trained in it, it would go very chaotic. So I would encourage members from both sides, all sides, security is real. It's a relevant issue. And the more precautions you can take now, the better you will be for the future. Thank you, Senator.
I know also we had some protests. The year before I came, there were a lot of protests here. I think it was 18. And we had an incident where one of our members needed emergency services, and frankly, they could not even get to that individual because of the protesters that were in the area. I guess one of the things that the reason I asked you to come and wanted to make sure these members were aware is that I think what I'm hearing you say is that the way we should go about this is to start planning as if things could happen, and then be prepared when they do, so that we don't have to have that reactive concept that we're talking about. So I know I've worked with Senator Carroll on some legislation about, the things that are brought to our attention in most recent years about different protests and whatnot. Certainly, we're not trying to quell anybody's rights under the law. I mean, they certainly can protest. They certainly can have their freedom of speech. All those kinds of things are paramount. But at the same time, I want to make sure that the people that I serve with are safe. I want to make sure that the staff members that work so hard and diligently every day for us are safe. And I want to make sure that our Capitol is preserved and our annex is preserved. So we appreciate that. And I appreciate you coming today and giving an overview. That's why we wanted to give that general overview. We may be asking more of you in the future. But does anybody else have any questions for Chief Brock? Okay. Well, Chief, I want to thank you for being here today and for giving us some of this enlightening information. I will let the members know that we will have another meeting next month. I will be chairing that meeting, as I think Chairman Westerfield is going to be out of town. That will be on September the 22nd. And then we will have a meeting also in October and November. So be mindful and attentive to those matters. If there are other matters that you think need to be addressed as we move forward in the interim, we have some things on target. But if you have other matters that have come to issue through these discussions, please let us know that. Thank you for your time and attention. With that,